Welcome to the World of Eora, a news and lore podcast about the Pillars of Eternity games, as well as Obsidian Entertainment's upcoming release, Avowed. Hello everybody and welcome to another episode of the World of Eora. I'm your host Eric, aka Gingerino. Thanks everyone for joining me on another episode of the World of Eora as we dive into the history, lore, and game mechanics of Pillars of Eternity 1 and 2 as we gear up for the release of Avowed. If you're new to the show, welcome to the show. Happy to have you here. Hope you're excited for Avowed, or maybe you're checking out Pillars of Eternity for the first time. Whatever your reason, glad you're here. We're going to be diving into some very interesting lore today. We're going to be talking about the different uses that we see for ruins in the first Pillars of Eternity game. Now, like last week's episode, I will give a little bit of a heads up. There are some spoilers in today's episode. The first portion of the episode is spoiler-free, so you don't have to worry about it. And the second portion does dive into spoilers. I do give another heads up, and there will be that music again, just in case you are a person that kind of skips ahead, so that way you won't accidentally hear it. But yeah, that's what we're going to be talking about today. A bit of news about, potential news anyways, about Avowed, maybe, I guess. Well, here, let me explain. Xbox is doing a showcase in June. So June 9th, I believe, is the date for that. And Xbox is going to be, it's just like they do every year around this time when E3 would normally be happening. Xbox is doing their own showcase. Now, there is no confirmation that Avowed is going to be there. That being said, I do personally think that the chances of Avowed at least having some level of an appearance is rather high, simply because the game is set to come out this year. This is going to be one of the major moments for Xbox to showcase things coming out this year. Avowed is obviously one of the games that they're really going to push in marketing. So it seems sensible to me that it'll make an appearance. I don't think it'll be the star of the show. I don't think we're going to get a deep dive like we did last time. I do think that we might get another trailer that looks at different parts of the game. Perhaps we'll get a more solid release date, like it might say November 2024 or something like that, where we won't get specifically when, just kind of a month. Who knows? Maybe something along those lines. And there is a rumor out there, I believe it was posted by someone from The Verge, that says Avowed is supposed to come out in November. That's some level of insider information, so obviously take that with a grain of salt. I don't know where that phrase comes from, by the way, but anyways, that is a rumor going around, which, if it's coming out in November, me personally, I hope it's in the earlier half, because once I hit holiday season, I cannot take days off of work, and unless I am able to play Avowed early, I'm not sure how I'm going to keep up with that stuff. So I'd like to be able to take some days off work just to be able to play that game and get some content done ahead of time for you. But anyways, that's a little bit of news there. Nothing else to really talk about. So yeah, today we're going to be talking about, as I mentioned, the Engwithan ruins that we see in the first Pillars of Eternity game throughout the Dyrwood, and a little bit about what their purposes were and how that might be really good news for the game of Avowed. So join me, will you, as we discuss today's lore.
I'm curious. What exactly did you find there?
So today we're going to be talking about a number of ruins from the Dyrwood, which is the setting for the first Pillars of Eternity game. And just to name them right off the bat, we're going to start off with Keelant Lys, then we're moving into Leia Raymond. We'll be talking a bit about Cleobon Relag, and if we have time, we'll also jump into some of the ones from the second Pillars of Eternity game. There's the Engwithan way station, there's a subterranean temple. There is technically one in an island called Ori-Okowiki, but we don't really know a lot about it. But we will end off the episode talking about Ter Naunith and Braeth Amon, which returns back to Pillars of Eternity 1. The aim is to get through the Pillars of Eternity 1 ruins, and then if we want, we maybe do a bonus episode, we'll talk about the other ones. So just to recap, again, like what is it we're talking about today? The Engwithan people, this is an ancient society of people that existed far before the times of Pillars of Eternity 1. They were an advanced civilization that had a vast understanding of animancy, although technically speaking not as good as the time of Pillars of Eternity 1, or at least according to some of the lore that I read. It's weird. In my mind, I always think of the Engwithans as people that are far, far advanced considering some of the things that they've accomplished. But I guess in certain senses, they are less advanced. But regardless, they are an advanced civilization that existed thousands of years ago, and they mysteriously disappeared. There are no longer any Engwithan civilizations or cultures or societies on the globe of Eora that we know of from the Pillars of Eternity games. You will learn more about the Engwithans if you play through the games. I do an episode on the Engwithans, episode number 63, if you want to learn more about them. Just as a heads up, it is a heavy spoiler kind of episode, so only listen to that episode if you really want to get to it, because the Engwithans and some of the things that they've done in history play a large role in some of the things that your character learns in their adventures through Pillars of Eternity 1 and 2. But to give a bit of a background about what these ruins are, why they were left behind, and why it's important, the ruins of the Engwithan peoples, especially in the Dyrwood area, are considered sacred by the local native tribes of Glonfath. So these Glonfathan native tribes, they consider these ruins to be something of a holy site for them, and they charge themselves with protecting it at all costs. And so exploring these ruins are not things that you, as a player character, are supposed to be doing, or really anyone that isn't from the Glonfathan societies. But as a result of your adventures through the Dyrwood in the first Pillars of Eternity game, you will inevitably explore some of the ruins. The first one being a place called Kilant Lys, which you use as an area to take refuge from a bioic, which is a spirit wind that can literally rend the soul from your body. It's literally what it sounds like. It's a spiritual wind. And so you and a couple others take refuge in a nearby ruin known as Kilant Lys. Now, we're going to talk more about Kilant Lys later on. For now, all that you need to know is that the ruins of Kilant Lys appear to have once been a place of worship or gathering, and that is what I'm reading off of the pillarsofeternity.fandom.com article for this location. There is a unique machine on the opposite side of Kilant Lys from where you first enter it. This is a soul machine, and I will talk a little bit about that later on in today's episode. This seems a place of worship or gathering. There's a few interesting things here in the ruins of Kilant Lys, which end up becoming kind of the tutorial dungeon for you, the new character to this game. It shows you how to go through all the things such as detecting traps, rewarding you for looting, solving some puzzles, going through some enemies, different types of enemies, sneaking. It goes through the whole kit and caboodle, anyways, of learning how to play the game. There's one interesting section of these ruins that I always pay attention to, is the section where there's a mural on the wall depicting the different Kith races that exist. So the Kith races are Orlins, Amauans, Elves, Dwarves, and Humans. Amauans and Orlins, if you're new to this world, are unique fantasy races that exist in the Pillars of Eternity world, but Dwarves, Elves, and Humans you're probably familiar with. There is this wall that is depicting, it's like a mural of these 5 races, and they're standing between these pillars with a fire on top of each one of the pillars. And it's related to a puzzle that you have to solve. One of the things that you might notice, though, is that the depiction of these Kith races do not include any of the godlike. It doesn't include a godlike race, which, when you play Pillars of Eternity 1 and 2, a godlike is a type of person that you can run into. So if you're not familiar with the lore behind Engwithans, that might lead you to wonder, like, what's going on there? Perhaps it could be because godlike can be very, very varietized, but there's other reasons as to why. But that is a Kilant Lys. I don't know what that name stands for. We do have some translations on a few of these locations, but that one we don't really know anything about. But we're going to return to that one later when we talk about Tir Naunith. The next Engwithan ruin that we see in the Dyrwood is Le'Rhemen, which is LLE space A space RHEMEN. This is an Engwithan ruin that you can run into just outside of Stormwall Gorge. This, technically speaking, is optional. You don't have to go through this at all. And the short version of what this place is, a weapon enchanting laboratory, I guess is what was the word to use here. The Le'Rhemen is translated as the place of bindings, and it was an Engwithan animantic facility focusing on crafting powerful soulbound weapons using white Adra. Adra, normal Adra, is actually green. Adra is unique in this world, is a gemstone that can house soul energy within it. So if you're thinking of a soul gem through Skyrim, you're not too far off, but it's a little bit more to it than that. And it's very, very central to the lore and the stories of this world. Expect to be hearing a lot about Adra in Avowed, and to be talking about it, and for it to be kind of one of the center things to talk about. It's a very useful object in the scientific field of animancy, which is the science of the soul. White Adra is different, because most Adra is green, but this is white Adra, which I will kind of theorize on what that is as we talk a little bit more about some more of these ruins we're looking at today. But Le'Rhemen is called the place of bindings, and it's made It was created as a facility to craft powerful soul-bound weapons. Soul-bound weapons are exactly what they sound like if you're familiar with them from other fantasy RPGs or Dungeons and Dragons. They're weapons that are bound to one person. And so as long as they are being used by that one person with that unique soul, they will continue to power up, if you will. They will get stronger and stronger. If they move to another person, they kind of reset, as it were. And that's just as the bond between a weapon and a person's soul is, if you're more exposed to each other, the person is using this weapon and their soul is kind of being infused into the weapon or vice versa, then it's just, they're going to enhance each other's abilities, if that makes any sense. When going through Leia Raymond, you will learn of a few different things that you can do here. What you have the option to do is you actually do have the option to enchant a weapon and make it more powerful. But there is a moral quandary within this one. There are a few locations in this ruin where you are given a question that you must answer, and that kind of gives you the idea of how you might want to enchant a weapon. And eventually, you have this soul vessel, which is a piece of white Audra, that you can then infuse with your own soul, and then that will allow you to then enchant the weapon and make it more powerful. There is a problem, however, in that there is a spider queen, Vithrak, which is kind of a humanoid psychic spider, named Neridek, that is living here, and they are telepathically communicating with you. They want to offer peace, they want to leave, but they have the soul vessel that you are going to use to be able to enchant the weapon with. So if you want to be able to enchant a weapon and get this one thing called, I think it's called Claudiolath, I can't remember how to pronounce it, Claudiolath. It's a unique weapon that is you can enchant to become more powerful, but in order to do that, you need the soul vessel. In order to get the soul vessel from Neridek, you have to kill them. So there's the moral quandary of you have this peaceful animal, but do you kill it to get the thing that you want, or do you let them leave? What you can end up doing is get a couple of your companions to stand on these different locations within the ruins, which will then indicate to this facility what enchantments you want to put in. And you take this soul vessel, if you will, which is uninfused, there's nothing in it, and you go to the main receptacle and you infuse your soul with this thing. Before you infuse it, the description of a soul vessel is, this large Audra stone is surprisingly light for its size. Fury radiates from it with an almost physical heat, chittering at you like the creature you took it from, which would be the Vithrak, this psychic humanoid spider. After you infuse it, however, you get the item Infused Soul Vessel, and it says, you feel connected to this Audra stone, though you cannot see past the surface layer. You know that a part of you is contained within. I did call it White Audra, and I was mistaken there. Sorry, it's not. It's just an Infused Soul Vessel. It's just a regular piece of green Audra, and you use that to empower a unique spear weapon. And so that's another location that we have there. Leia Raymond. And the common theme around a lot of these Engwithan ruins is that they are locations for animancy experiments. Those are the types of things that we generally see. There's not a lot of ruins that we see that are like, communal living areas or anything like that. A lot of it has to do with scientific research in the field of animancy. The next area we're going to talk about is called Cleabon Relag, which has a little bit more going on there than Leia Raymond. This is considered an ancient temple to Bareth at this point in time, but it's still an Engwithan ruin, and it's home to some of their most advanced anime machines and foundries. This location was one of the centers for Engwithan animat manufacturing, capable of mass-producing magical warriors to provide the limited population of the Engwith, which were depopulated for reasons we're not going to get into, with superior weapons to use against their enemies. So basically, Engwith had a depopulation issue, which we're not going to get into, but they wanted to be able to have means by which to protect themselves and enforce things that they wanted to enforce. And to do that, they did this thing where they manufactured animats. Now, if you're not familiar with what an animat is, I talk about them a little bit on my episode regarding vessels. Long story short, they're essentially the closest thing you're going to get to robot companions. There are these pieces of armor that I think even have Audra gemstone infused inside of it, like literally a humanoid body made of Audra, but I can't remember exactly. And they are infused with the loyal soul of someone within their society. And this empowers the animat to be able to, like a robot, perform limited functionality. Now, I know that what the temptation of thought is here is to think, well, I take this one person's soul and I put it in the armor, and now the armor is infused with the soul, so it has the same consciousness as this person. While certainly animancers have been trying to do that throughout the years, that is not nearly as easy as you and I might think it is. That is something that people haven't really achieved at this point. So they're able to use the soul energy of a person to power the armor, to power the Audra within the armor so that it can do simple tasks. And usually it's along the lines of, being a warrior, protecting an area, protecting a person, things like that. And so the Engwithans were able to manufacture in a mass production kind of a way these animats, and that's what this area is for. But this set of ruins also has one of those kind of soul machine things that I was talking about, like Keelant Lys has, and we're going to be talking about them pretty soon. One thing I do like about Cleobon Releg, though, as a place to explore within the game, is that there are a lot of inscriptions to read and a lot of reliefs that you can inspect. And a lot of it contains interesting lore and kind of helps to flesh out the whole purpose behind Cleobon Releg. You have things that are a little bit more poetic sounding, things like, how can the people of virtues resist the profane and lawless? Where can the elm dig its roots that the storms cannot wash them out? And this is some religious talk going on here from some of the stuff that the Engwithans were dealing with at the time. This was during a time when their population significantly decreased, and they were having somewhat of a religious issue going on, is what we're going to leave it at that. And there was definitely these mantras going on with the people that were still there in moving forward with kind of their religious, I guess inquisition is the closest thing I can use as a word to describe what they were doing at the time. And so it seems like this is almost kind of like propaganda in that kind of a way. There are also reliefs that have murals and pictograms drawn on them that kind of explain what's going on here. For example, in an entrance to the main chamber, there are a series of pictographs. They're simple but clear and carved on a column in an alcove. They have figures of men and women with their arms raised and are carved into the top of the column. Suits of armor in the same pose have been chiseled to the bottom. So they're kind of signifying the connection between these men and women and these suits of armor. Later on, however, you find a pictogram in an alcove that depicts a lone figure lying upon an altar and another member of this procession that is driving a dagger into this person's heart. Something is flowing from the dying man into a white stone that is perched above the altar. And this we end up kind of deducing is White Audra. So it sounds like, just looking at what the way this is described, that there's a person, willing sacrifice kind of person. They get on an altar, another person kills them, and it sounds like their soul goes into the Audra, thereby making it white, or perhaps the Audra is white. I don't know how Engwithans had White Audra, or what makes White Audra. I can't remember off the top of my head anyways, but there you go. So whether this person's soul is going into the White Audra, or their soul is empowering the White Audra like a battery, something along those lines. Later on, we find one in a place called the Assembly Chamber, and there are images in this alcove that depict a row of pale stones, so kind of like that White Audra we're talking about, surrounding a suit of armor. Something flows from the stones and into the armor, imbuing it with a golden halo. And so these images kind of give you the idea of what's going on here. You have people that come in, they willingly sacrifice themselves, and their essence, which is the stuff souls are made of, empower this White Audra. This White Audra is used to then empower the animats so that the animats can function the way they are designed to. And that's what Cleobon Releg is for. It is a mass production facility for animats. And now we understand how it works. I like that Obsidian took the time to actually write out this is how it works, rather than just, they make animats here, done. Like they actually stop and talk about how it happens, if you want to pay attention to that stuff. Now we're going to skip the ruins from Deadfire for now. Perhaps I'll return to them in a future episode, but we're going to talk about these last two ruins from the first Pillars of Eternity game in the Dyrwood. The first being Ter Nauneth, and the next one being Braith Aemon. And we're also going to bring back Keelant Lys and technically Cleobon Releg at this point to talk about some of the more deep lore that's going on behind the scenes. What I am going to talk about in this next portion is major spoilers for the first Pillars of Eternity game. So if you're going through that, or you want to avoid major spoilers for the first Pillars of Eternity game in the main narrative, then I highly suggest stopping the episode here and then moving on with your life and perhaps coming back later, however you want to do it. But yeah, we're going to talk about some pretty heavy spoilers, so this has been your last heads up. So now talking about Tir Noneth, which is simply called Tower in the game, it's located in the main city that you see in the first Pillars of Eternity game, in Heritage Hill, and Tir Noneth, as well as the other two that I've mentioned, Cleobon Relag and Keelant Lys, have these soul machines on them, these big kind of almost egg-shaped things that kind of come apart and they spin at great speeds. And what these soul machines are for, if you're familiar with the game, then you'll already know, but if you don't, here we go. What these soul machines are for are essentially to suck a whole bunch of soul energy out of a person's body and then channel that energy to a different location. So you can imagine, let's say at Tir Noneth, there was a town or a village or something that would have been at that location. If this machine that is here at Tir Noneth is activated, it will suck the soul out of everybody nearby. Like it'll just suck it all up, kind of like the Beowick that we talked about. And it will then take that energy, and it is designed to then forward that energy somewhere else, which is, we're going to talk about that in a second. The tower in Heritage Hill, known as Tir Noneth, it definitely seems like a location that was used for the scientific research of this stuff, like how to develop this soul machine in the first place. This seems to be one of the locations for that, but I don't actually technically know for sure. That's just me speculating. These three locations, and possibly more, but we don't know, of Keelant Lys, well, when I say we don't know, but I don't know off the top of my head. We have Keelant Lys, Cleobon Relag, and Tir Noneth. These machines were activated within the game, and they send soul energy to another location. But what is that location? Well, the location where they get sent to is a place called Sun in Shadow, but it can only be reached by going through Breath Aemon, which is the last Engwithan ruin that I want to talk about today. This is where the big spoilers come in. So if you've accidentally gone a little further than you wanted, this is the definitely the point of no return point. But Breath Aemon is the last place that you go to before going into the Sun and Shadow location where the end of the game is. Breath Aemon is, in short, a soul prison, and it was a horrible place to subject a person to. The Engwithans, they were doing their religious inquisition to keep their secret of what they had done, and when they found people that were apostates or heretics or were against their faith or just worthy of being publicly tortured, they would do so. And so they would publicly torture them to get them to confess so that they could then repent or possibly get forgiveness or blah, blah, blah. But if they refused to do so, or if their crimes were considered incredibly heinous, they would almost certainly be thrown into this deep underground ruin of Breath Aemon. And what happened here is that the people that were down here they were too far beneath the earth to just escape. So they couldn't just come back up to the top of the ground of Eora. They were stuck down there, and they would actually be locked inside Audra cells, and that rendered them immobile, and their souls would also be stuck in there as well. So they're essentially locked inside of a prison where they're completely immobilized, and they will, for lack of a better word, live there forever, because the soul does not degrade the same way the body does. And so even if their body were to degrade, which I don't think it gets into it very much on what happens there, the soul that is down there is still stuck down there, fully conscious of what's going on. And like that's a pretty awful thing to subject a person to. But there you go. That's what Breath Aemon is. It is a soul prison where people's souls stay forever, or at least until their soul dissipates in some way, shape, or form, because it is a concrete, actual, real object. So there is a sense of finitude about it, just like anything else that has got matter to it or concrete. But still, these souls can live for a very long time, possibly forever. In this fantasy world, I guess technically we don't really know. But yeah, that's what Breath Aemon is. And Breath Aemon leads to Sun in Shadow, which is where the game ends. And this is where all the soul energy I was talking about before is being channeled into. Because Theos, the main antagonist of the first Pillars of Eternity game, he wants to use all of that soul energy that he has taken from not only all the people in Heritage Hill, but all the children that are being born within the Dyrwood, which is the cause of the Hollowborn crisis, all these kids that are being born without souls. Theos is taking all this soul energy that he has siphoned that is now being redirected to Sun and Shadow, and he wants to send all of that soul energy to his goddess Woodica so that she may be empowered and become queen of the gods once again, because there's this whole story about Woodica at one time being the queen of the gods, and then they didn't like her, so they took her off the throne, and now she is in exile, if you will, and not in power anymore. But anyway, so that's what Theos is trying to do. He's trying to send all this soul energy to Woodica, so Woodica will be in power again, and she can be the one in charge of things, because that is the goddess that he is betrothed to. In fact, he is Woodica's favored. Every time he dies in life and he is born again, when this new body enters into adolescence, Woodica reawakens his soul so that he has all his memories again. Because if you're already not familiar with it, even though you're in the spoiler section of this podcast, this world runs on a cycle of reincarnation. And so two bodies in history might share the same soul. Obviously, just one got it before another. And there are states that people can get to called awakened, where you remember previous lives. But individuals that are Woodica's favored, like Theos is, can have their souls awakened in such a way that they completely remember their previous lives, and actually that personality is now the one that comes to the forefront of this new person. So in a sense, you're living forever. Even though you have these new bodies all the time, your memories and who you are as a person comes to the forefront in adolescence, and you get to continue living the way you wanted to live, just in a new time, to new parents, etc., etc. There's a few other interesting powers that come with that as well, but perhaps we'll save that for an episode where we look at just Theos as well, and the Leaden Key. That would actually be a pretty interesting episode to do. Definitely spoiler heavy, though, for those of you who like that kind of a thing. That is the lore for the Engwithan ruins that we see in the first Pillars of Eternity game throughout the location of the Dyrwood. I've always found them very interesting, partly because, well, there's a lot of lore tied to them, but we learn a lot about what's going on behind the scenes. And it's also a place where you can take these ideas throughout the game and apply them in kind of a practical way. You know what I'm saying? Like, we're learning about how Audra works. We're learning about soul mechanics and the cycle of reincarnation known as the wheel. But, like, what are the ways that these kind of ideas can be practically applied to the narrative of the game? Well, you have a place like Cleobon Relag, where it's like they can create soul-infused armor to act as protectors for their people. How do they do that? You know, they sacrifice people. Their soul goes into an Audra. The Audra acts as a battery that they use to charge the armor. You know, it's a location where you start to peek behind the curtain of how this stuff works. As well, you get a good look at this ancient civilization that harbors some of the deepest secrets of the narratives that we see in Eora through the Pillars of Eternity games, and almost certainly Avowed. Which, speaking of which, let's ask, what might this have to do with Avowed?
Is an oath worth the weight of a crown?
The Engwithans being as enigmatic as they are and as important to the narratives in Pillars of Eternity 1 and 2, and therefore Eora as a whole, there is definitely the chance that we could see Engwithan ruins or Engwithan impacts in the Living Lands. There's no reason to think that the Engwithans couldn't have reached the Living Lands and that they didn't settle down there for any reason, or that there wasn't a contingency of some of that society that were doing research over there. There's no reason to think that that couldn't be possible. Now, it's also possible that the Engwithans never went to the Living Lands, and so we'll never see any of those ruins there. But I think it is more likely that we will see Engwithans or signs of Engwithans within the Living Lands. At the very least, we do know that there is going to be some form of underground ruins in Avowed, just because we've seen in the trailers these locales where we're underground, and there's ruined structures in the background. So we know to a certain degree that that's going to be there. Whether it's Engwithan or not, we don't really know. It's good to see that that kind of trope will exist, and that perhaps Obsidian will include the same level of mystery and intrigue into that. But I would go as far as to say that the Engwithans might actually even tie into the main narrative of Avowed, as is common with Pillars of Eternity 1 and 2, and I'm sure with a lot of narratives within Eora that people at Obsidian are wanting to develop. The things that the Engwithans were doing centuries ago, if not millennia ago, have a deep impact onto the stories that we're having now in the times of Pillars of Eternity 1 and 2 and Avowed. It might be that this Dream Scourge thing that we are sent to the Living Lands as an envoy of Adir to go investigate is actually something that originates from the Engwithan times. It might have been something that they developed or discovered or what have you, that they locked deep underground in one of their labs somewhere. That, you know, they developed a virus that got out somehow. Who knows, right? Like, there could be anything that is involved in that way, shape, or form. Personally, I am of the opinion that the Engwithans will make some level of appearance in Avowed. Obviously not in person, because they are a dead society. But, I mean, who knows? Maybe they'll pull a Mass Effect 3, and they'll have, like, one Engwithan left that you can talk to. I mean, there are technically some Engwithans that you can interact with in the Pillars of Eternity games. They're very far and few between, and not all of the interactions are very deep. that you can have, but yeah, the possibility is definitely there. So I'm hopeful that we'll see Engwithan ruins, possibly even some Engwithans themselves in Avowed, and that it'll actually play into the narrative. That's my guess on how it will be involved in Avowed. But that's everything for today's episode. I will begin closing out the episode now. I've just restarted playing The Outer Worlds. I'm doing a very full playthrough of The Outer Worlds. I'm using it as kind of a tester for me as a content creator to see how well I can keep up with the pace of that game, because The Outer Worlds is constantly being contrasted with Avowed in terms of scope and possibly game length as well. And so I wonder to myself, how can I maintain the podcast while playing the game in a normal way, but also make sure that I'm releasing content in a regular manner? And so I'm kind of testing myself by playing The Outer Worlds right now and just seeing how long is it going to take me to get through this game, playing it all the way through. And so I'm replaying the game entirely. I'm essentially doing it like the first time I did, where I'm just checking every nook and cranny. I'm reading everything that there is. And there's a lot already in just my first couple of playthroughs that I've rediscovered that I forgot about. For example, like the OSI, the kind of scientism religion that exists in The Outer Worlds. I forgot like some of the philosophical foundations that are there, and I find that incredibly interesting. But yeah, so that's just why I'm playing The Outer Worlds, is just to kind of get that practice in so that I know how to do that as a content creator. And I'm trying to figure out how to do that entire balance. The only other way I could possibly do that is by, playing Avowed a little bit early, which, I mean, hey, if anyone at Obsidian is listening, I thoroughly trust your guys' decision-making skills. And so if I am not deemed worthy to have a copy, I fully support that, because I don't know the kind of decisions that go process for that. I mean, that being said, I would totally take one. If I don't have to take days off work, that's great. But anyways, I don't, like I said, I trust you guys completely. I was trying to make a joke, and I think it fell flat, but whatever, here we are. But yeah, that's what I've been playing. What have you been playing? Send me an email, worldofeora@gmail.com, as well as if you have any questions, comments, or concerns, anything like that. How are you looking forward to the June 9th Xbox showcase, which I'm almost certain Avowed's going to make an appearance on, but who knows, right? I guess we'll find out. Yeah, if you have anything like that you want to chat about, worldofeora@gmail.com, hit me up on Twitter @worldofeora, where I post updates on the show, anything like that. I'm Gingerino on most platforms, if you're trying to find me personally, like on Reddit or something like that. If you're wanting to support the show in any way, you've been listening for a while and you'd like to do that, you can do so on my Ko-fi account, ko-fi.com/worldofeora. That's ko-fi.com/worldofeora. Thanks to everyone who has supported so far. I should have given you replies if you want to go check those out. But anyways, thank you so much for the support that you guys have all given. And the continuity of this show will continue to exist because of things like that. Anyways, that's everything for today, guys. Thanks for listening to today's episode about the Engwithan ruins that we see in the first Pillars of Eternity game throughout the Dyrwood, what they were used for, and that might give us some flavor and idea about what we might see for Engwithan ruins in Avowed, and the types of things that they might be used in. Obviously, it's very animancy related, having to do with the souls. It seems like they were heavily into that science, so who knows what we could find. Perhaps it'll be related to the Dream Scourge, the corruption that we're here in Avowed to see. But that's everything for today. Thanks, everybody. I've been your host, Eric, aka Gingerino, and I'll see you guys next time.